Hey everybody, I'm Simon Zinzowski, and today I want to tell you one of my favorite stories from gaming history. Grim Fandango is an adventure game about Mexican folklore and skeleton detectives that was released in 1998 to universal critical acclaim. It was bold, innovative, and it was such a commercial failure that it nearly wiped adventure gaming off the map. This is the story of how gaming's greatest masterpiece nearly killed its own genre. As some of you old heads might remember, there was a time when the graphic adventure game genre was one of the most popular categories in PC gaming. Sierra Online popularized the format in the mid-1980s with quest games like King's Quest, Space Quest, and Police Quest. LucasArts, yes, that Lucas, entered the adventure game market in 1987 with Maniac Mansion and innovated on Sierra's approach by implementing their Scum engine, allowing for a point-and-click interface that removed the need for text-based commands. But it was in the 1990s when adventure gaming really took off. The Secret of Monkey Island, Day of the Tentacle, and the first Sam & Max game all came out in the early 90s. These games were charming and accessible, but also very popular. A lot of that popularity was attributed to one man. Tim Schafer, a game designer at LucasArts and an important character in this story, began his career at the company in 1989 as a programmer and writer. He co-wrote The Secret of Monkey Island, a whimsical pirate adventure game, and its sequel. He then served as co-project lead on Day of the Tentacle, a time-traveling sci-fi adventure game about an evil mutant tentacle. These were some of the most important and influential adventure games that LucasArts ever made. So in 1995, they gave him the opportunity to act as sole project lead for Full Throttle. It was a gritty story about a biker gang leader framed for murder. It had a notably more mature tone than was common for adventure games at the time, and that turned out to be a really good idea because Full Throttle was a huge commercial success, selling over 1 million copies. That was great news for LucasArts because they were facing a major problem: competition. By the mid-1990s, technological advancements in 3D graphics and hardware had led to innovation. FPS games like Doom and Quake offered players real-time action-based gameplay. Role-playing games like Final Fantasy VII and Baldur's Gate now had cinematic stories with branching narratives that competed for the same story-enjoying audience as adventure games did. And 3D platformers like Mario 64 and Tomb Raider shifted player expectations towards movement-based gameplay that adventure games couldn't offer. The landscape of gaming shifted radically from the mid-80s to the late 90s, and there were rising concerns about the commercial viability of point-and-click adventure games in this new market. At one time a titan of the industry, sales figures for adventure titles were no longer keeping up with these new games. So LucasArts turned to Tim Schafer. He had had success before, and a lot of it. He was a bit of a golden goose, and it just so happened that he had an idea for a project that could be the kind of major success they badly needed. An ambitious attempt to modernize the adventure genre with 3D character models, a new control scheme, and a mature story on par with major motion pictures. Yes, sales of goofy and cartoonish adventure games were down, but the mature tone of Full Throttle had landed with consumers. There was a chance here for LucasArts to live up to its namesake, to tell film-like stories, and start competing with Scorsese instead of with Mario. At this point, LucasArts wasn't just trying to stay relevant. They were fighting for the survival of an entire genre. Failure wouldn't just mean financial loss, it would confirm industry suspicions that the era of adventure games was over. LucasArts decided to pin their hopes on Tim Schafer and his new game, Grim Fandango. Hey, I hope you're enjoying the video, and if you are and have any friends who you think might enjoy it too, sharing this video is the best way to support my channel, and I'd really appreciate it. Anyway, back to the video. Work began on Grim Fandango in 1995, and it was no small project. It was to be one of the most expensive adventure games ever made. It had a $3 million budget, which was almost double what Full Throttle had, but still not quite at the level of something like the $12 million spent on Ocarina of Time. The game was to be a cross between Mexican folklore and 1940s film noir. Schaefer and his team drew inspiration from Dia de los Muertos and classic noirs like Casablanca, The Maltese Falcon, and Double Indemnity. It was developed using an entirely new engine, Grim E, an iteration on the Sith engine used for Jedi Knight Dark Forces 2. Unlike the Scum engine used on all previous LucasArts adventure games, Grim E could handle real-time 3D character models, not just 2D sprites. The switch to 3D meant keeping up with the times, but also forced them to abandon their tried and tested point-and-click mechanics. Instead, Grim Fandango would use tank controls, just like the newly released Resident Evil. This was a new and innovative method of movement, implemented into a new and innovative engine, applied to perhaps the most ambitious project LucasArts had ever taken on. Huge swaths of dialogue needed to be written, recorded, and imported. A fully orchestrated soundtrack was composed. Cutscenes had to be rendered, gameplay had to be tested, and it all had to be done in the service of telling a good story. And at the end of it all, Grim Fandango was completed and released after 3 years in development on October 30th, 1998. Grim Fandango turned out to be amazing. You play as Manny Calavera, a travel agent working in the Department of Death in the city of El Mardo. Manny is a Grim Reaper in appearance and in function, responsible for collecting the souls of the dead and selling them travel packages for the afterlife. You see, in Grim Fandango, souls of the departed must journey through the land of the dead to reach the ninth underworld, their final resting place. The journey can take up to 4 years, on foot, unless the soul in question has lived a virtuous life, in which case they may qualify for premium travel packages, like the number 9 train, which reaches the ninth underworld in just 4 minutes. When we meet Manny, he's down on his luck, stuck with clients who can't afford more than a walking stick. Desperate, Manny steals a premium client from his co-worker Domino Hurley, hoping it will turn things around. This client is Mercedes Meche Colomar, a woman who lived an exceptionally virtuous life and should easily qualify for the number 9. But she's denied her ticket and forced to war. Realizing something strange is going on, Manny sets off to find Meche and uncover the truth. This decision kicks off a 4-year journey across the land of the dead. The story and the artwork of Grim Fandango, the heart and soul of any narrative adventure game, were exceptional. And the gameplay was good too. It was standard adventure game stuff, environmental exploration, inventory-based puzzles, and plenty of dialogue interactions. It was functional and helped immerse players into their role in the story. The story itself was completely linear and very cinematic. It featured themes of corruption, redemption, and existential reflection. We saw Manny Calavera transform from a cynical salesman to selfless hero. The game's dialogue was sharp, and its secondary characters, like Glottis the Driver, were compelling. All the critics agreed. Grim Fandango had delivered on its promise of telling a mature story at a grand scale. Despite all of its risky ambitions, it was a massive artistic success. That much was undeniable. There was only one problem. Nobody actually bought the game. Grim Fandango did not sell well, but everybody who did buy it seemed to like it. Reviews from the time highlighted its art direction, storytelling, voice acting, and setting. Critics praised the sharp scripting and funny characters. The game's soundtrack too, composed by Peter McConnell, was yet another standout element. However, its control scheme became a point of consternation. The use of tank controls required players to rotate their character left or right and then move forward or backwards, and it turned out to be very cumbersome. Simple yet crucial tasks like picking up items or interacting with NPCs were frustratingly hard. This control scheme ended up alienating players who were accustomed to the simplicity of point and click. The tank control problem wasn't insignificant, but the game, in a vacuum, was still incredibly good. The issue was, it didn't launch into a vacuum. It launched into an industry landscape that was already hostile to adventure games. LucasArts already knew that when they greenlit the project, but by 1998, it had only gotten worse. The big games of 1998, like Half-Life and Ocarina of Time, had fluid real-time action, immersive 3D worlds, and responsive gameplay. Console gaming was increasingly seen as the way of the future, and Grim Fandango was a PC exclusive. Adventure games in general were seen as an aging genre, and Grim Fandango was swimming upstream. This wasn't a surprise. LucasArts had taken a calculated gamble. They thought that if Grim Fandango was good enough, it might be able to overcome those challenges, maybe even turn the tides and usher in a new golden age. Well, as it turned out, they were half right. The game was really, really good, but it just didn't move the needle. Sales figures are unclear, but estimates suggest it sold around 100,000 copies in its first year. In contrast, Half-Life and Ocarina of Time were both released in 1998, just like Grim Fandango. But Half-Life sold 500,000 copies in its first 6 months, and Ocarina of Time sold 2.5 million copies in just 6 weeks. One thing was abundantly clear. At launch, Grim Fandango was in contention for the greatest adventure game that had ever been made. And if that wouldn't sell, no adventure game would. Following the release of Grim Fandango, LucasArts internally assessed its commercial performance. The game was not an outright failure, but its financial underperformance relative to its obviously high quality reinforced a growing belief in the company that traditional adventure games were just no longer profitable. Management moved to prioritize action games and Star Wars games over adventure games. The decision to step away from adventure gaming wasn't just a business pivot. It symbolized the end of a cultural era that had defined LucasArts' identity since the late 80s. Grim Fandango's disappointing sales became the definitive proof for executives that adventure games, regardless of their artistic quality, no longer had a meaningful place in the gaming mainstream. Just 2 years after Grim Fandango, LucasArts released what would be its final traditional adventure game, Escape from Monkey Island. The year 2000 also saw the departure of Tim Schafer. He left LucasArts and founded his own independent studio, Double Fine Productions. But Double Fine didn't make adventure games either, at least not for a while. Instead, they saw immediate success with Psychonauts, a narrative-driven 3D platformer. The mid-2000s was something of a dark age for adventure games, but eventually they came back around. In 2012, Double Fine raised over $3.3 million on Kickstarter for a brand new point-and-click adventure game, Broken Age. Around the same time, Telltale Games, which had been founded by former LucasArts employees, saw a pretty major success with The Walking Dead. These titles proved that there was still an audience for adventure games, even if the golden age had long since passed. And what about Grim Fandango? Well, since its release, the game had been all but abandoned by LucasArts. Fans were forced to keep it alive with unofficial patches and workarounds for modern hardware. But in 2012, Disney bought LucasArts and basically shut it down. It's a pretty sad story and maybe one for another day, but it resulted in LucasArts selling off all of its old IP. Tim Schafer used this opportunity, backed by some money from Sony, to buy the rights to Day of the Tentacle, Full Throttle, and Grim Fandango. Double Fine went on to remaster each one of these classic games, starting with Grim Fandango in 2015. This finally made the game accessible to a whole new generation of gamers. It also, importantly, fixed up those tank controls. Grim Fandango has been heralded as a pioneer of video game storytelling. It broke the mold and proved gaming narratives could be on par with any other medium. Its artistic legacy far outweighs its immediate commercial failure. Today it's remembered as one of the greatest games of all time and one of the grandfathers of storytelling in gaming. Every modern story-driven experience, from Alan Wake to Red Dead 2, owes something to the legacy left by Grim Fandango. Alright, that's the end of the video. Thank you guys so much for watching. Shout out to all my Patreons on screen right now, and I'll see you in the next one.